Good morning, Father. Good morning, sisters and brothers. Good morning. I'm scared. Okay. So the theme of this conference is igniting the word. And when Trudy asked me to lead a worship service, she said it should have something to do with fire. And would I do it on Friday? So I was thinking, great, Friday night I can light the Sabbath candles, and that'll be easy. Then it turned out it was Friday morning, and they said no fire is allowed in this room, so then what? But I have to say that when my grandmother fled Poland from the pogroms, the only thing of value she brought with her were her brass candlesticks, because lighting the Sabbath candles was a very important part of her life. And when the children of Israel were crossing the desert and they got the 10 Commandments, the 5th commandment was, 6 days you may work, but on the 7th day you must rest. And the lighting of the candles is the welcoming of the Sabbath, the day of rest, to spend with our beloved Father in heaven. So, to this day, and I don't know if it goes back 4,000 years or not, but I know that in Jesus' family, Mary was very likely lighting the candles on Friday nights. And in observant Jewish families, even now, on Friday nights, the candles are lit to welcome the Sabbath, to welcome a day of rest to spend with our beloved Heavenly Father. So I'd like you to imagine that it's Friday night and that a beautiful table is set with a lovely meal, and that I would imagine the oldest woman in the family, and I may be the oldest woman in the room, so I have the honor, lights the candles and sings the prayer to welcome the Sabbath. And I was thinking of inviting any of you who are members of my tribe to join me up here. If you, and even if you're not a member of my tribe, you're welcome. You're a member? Okay. So I am going to light the candles, and we're gonna sing the prayer over the Sabbath candles to welcome the day of rest with our loving Heavenly Father. I guess, I'm not real sure. I used to just light the candles without all the rest of the deal, but we're igniting the word. There we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. I'm trying to think of the translation. Blessed art thou,
King of the universe.
O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has commanded us to light the Sabbath candles.
With his commands to light the candles.
And I would like to reframe the blessing to thank you, dear Heavenly Father, for lighting the flame of your light in all of our hearts and souls so that we may stay with you not only on the day of Sabbath, but every minute of every day. And so we're here to ignite the word, and we are igniting our hearts with your love, Father, with the symbolism of the lighting of the Sabbath candles. So thank you, everybody, and I'm going to invite you to take 3 minutes to take close your eyes gently.
It's my pleasure to introduce Alice Wood, who's going to give our first talk this morning. I'm sure a lot of you know Alice. I'm sure some of you don't know her well. Alice is a very, I would say, quiet person, although she has a very, if you search or if you ask for her links, she does a lot of talking about the book in a lot of different ways that you might not have seen, so I urge you to explore that after you hear her. But you do know Alice because by your fruits you shall know them, and you know a lot of her fruits. Whether they come out in this conference or the TEP program or the many other projects she's done. And today she's going to share some of that wisdom that she's picked up along the way. And it's going to be very interesting and inspiring because it always is. Alice?
Hello. I'm going to embarrass Tim here. Did you guys know he's a great ballroom dancer? I've got a slide up there. It says, "The purpose of education should be acquirement of skill, pursuit of wisdom, realization of selfhood, and attainment of spiritual values." That is a holistic approach to education. For many of you, reading the Urantia book and discussing it in study groups move you down this path toward the attainment of spiritual values. But not everyone is like you. Not everyone is like me. Not everyone wants to read and discuss. How can we create a learning environment that is appealing and enriching to a wider variety of people? So, I'm a member of a mainstream Presbyterian church. They've got a traditional service, stand up, sit down, pray in unison, the usual. And they call this worship. And sometimes I do find it to be worshipful. Sometimes a song will hit me in just the right way, or the sermon will be so thought-provoking as to move me down a path of awe. But this is often not the case with the stand-up, sit-down service for me. And so the problem that I ran into after COVID is that after I had stopped going to church, I didn't want to go back. And I'm not the only person to have experienced this. Lots of people broke the habit of going to church and never returned. And for me, this was because the practice of standing up and sitting down just wasn't feeding my spirit. The music wasn't doing it for me. The unison prayers were not inspiring. The format has kept me away. I'm going to bet that this happens with study groups too. There are differences between study groups, but to speak in generalizations, I'm going to say that Urantia book study groups contain a lot of reading and discussing. And that's great. Reading and discussing are a valuable way for us to come together and socialize. It's also two primary learning components that educators are encouraged to work into their curricula. Here's a list of the 4 primary learning styles. This is a pretty standard list that you'll find all over educator websites. It's called the VARC learning styles. There's reading and writing, Auditory, that would be like reading out loud, listening to someone speak, or having a discussion. Visual, as in graphs, charts, maps, and timelines, illustrations. And kinesthetic, or doing the thing that you're supposed to be learning, getting hands-on experience with something. Our study groups do some of these things really well, like I said, reading and discussing. And why is that? Most of you know that when the Urantia papers were first being presented, they were read and discussed by the forum, which was a group of people who would ask questions about the papers so that a second draft could be written by the revelators. This was our first study group, and it, unbeknownst to the people in the group, would lay out a pattern for study groups that would be followed for the next 100 years. And now here we are, reading and discussing. If you attend a study group, then chances are you like this format. It works for you. It stimulates your mind and your spirit, and you may be thinking, Alice, everyone in my study group loves what we do. This is a perfect format. Yes. And no. Our study groups have self-selected so that those who like this format keep coming and those who do not stay away. Just like how my church's format drove me away. Whatever a person's interest or potential interest in the book may be, what if our narrow format limits the people who we can reach? What is the experience of the newcomer, or what was the experience of the person who never came back? Have you guys ever heard of the Bogat Standard? Anybody? The Bogat Standard. Good for you, everybody. It's a term that my husband coined several years back, and I generally advise people to ignore 90% of what he says. So well done, all of you. The Bogat Standard is the wish that for every 500,000 people, there would be one study group. That's something that Bogota, Colombia achieved. In a city of 8 million people, they had 16 study groups. Or at least they did at the time that Chris coined this phrase. And the thing about that is you can have some variety with 16 study groups. An urban area with one thriving study group can seed another one that has a different flavor to it. Instead of being the North study group and the South study group, it could be the reading and writing study group and the reflective writing study group. So the person who says, I don't want to read the Urantia book with other people, I can read it on my own, they might have an interest in a different activity like reflective writing prompts. Now, I can't just snap my fingers and make the Bogota Standard become a reality. So we don't have the luxury of providing a bunch of different formats for people to choose from. But we can play with our study groups. Let's try new things. Let's expand our horizons beyond that which we have always done and try out something like writing in a study group. Have any of you guys ever been asked to do that? Anyone? We've got one. I haven't been asked. What I have seen happen a lot is that people read through a tough section, they all scratch their heads, and then they look to the smartest person in the group. I'm looking for that person here. But writing, it turns out, is one of the most important learning components. Here's a clip from a series of videos that we use in the teacher education program featuring retired educator and Urantia book reader Robert Arkins. Hit it, Tim.
And after about 20 minutes, their brain is going to start to fade. Now their eyeballs will still be open, their eyelids will still be open. Don't let that fool you. Their brain is starting to fade, and you might think this is a downtime in terms of the brain, but don't throw that away, because this is still teaching time. Because at this time, this is the time when they must build meaning. This is the practice time. Practice. When they must build meaning. You can't build meaning in their brain, but you can set the stage for it. And you do that by stop talking, you stop talking, and they start writing. Okay? As you do that, if you do nothing else in your teaching, get your students to write. No other learning strategy works nearly as well as getting them to write. It will start to build connections, and that's when they build meaning. Building connections. Now, people say that in our brain we can't build any new nerves, and that's might be true, but nerves can build dendrites, new dendrites. Here's a nerve. We know they're long, and nerves have dendrites at the end. We can build new dendrites. I used to have only 4. I've got 5 now. And dendrites can grow longer, and they can reach out to other new nerves and literally make new cellular connections with other new nerve cells. When we are building meaning, we are literally building new connections. It is not just a figure of speech. And you get them to do that by writing and by using those active verbs.
Oh, thank you for the reminder. He's my father. I sent him a card, but I forgot to call. So people can build meaning about what they're reading if we give them opportunities to make connections on their own. They could read something tough, scratch their heads, turn to the smartest person in the group, and then be told, you can develop your own understanding for why this is important. You can figure this out on your own. Oh, there's Andre. So what are some different writing exercises? 1, there are exercises that help people understand what is being taught. This would be like asking people to summarize a section. Have them spend some time figuring it out before they turn to the smartest person in the group. 2, they can also write responses to reflective questions that don't really have a right or wrong answer, but they involve interpreting the information. 3, people can also be asked to spend some time journaling at the end of a study group, during which time they can integrate the information into their own lives. They can start applying it to their lives. So let's go back to our list and see what we haven't talked about yet. Reading, we do a lot of that in study groups, so I'm just going to skip past that here. Auditory, that's like discussing. We do a lot of that as well, so I'm going to skip past that. Visual, graphs, maps, timelines, it clarifies complex information. People who really like visual components can also benefit a lot from having illustrations and photographs to help them to process content. And by the way, people have their own preferred learning components. We all benefit from all of these, but some of them might stand out as more significant to us as individuals. I'm a big writer. You might be a big graphic organizer person. I developed a new respect for visual learning when I realized that one of my sons gained a lot from this component. He helps me create these activity pages that are Urantia lessons for adolescents. You've probably seen them around Seraphim Mail. And I was always putting in things like crossword puzzles and word finds, and as my son was testing out these pages for me, he said, I don't want to find words about the Trinity. I want to draw a picture of the Trinity. And I never would have included an activity like that if he hadn't suggested it. And it was a reminder for me that people have minds that are different from mine. So you can have an activity like draw a picture that represents the Trinity, or hold up an image and ask, what does this image tell you about God? Or this image. Or these images. Kinesthetic, getting hands-on experience with something. How can we incorporate that into study groups? Well, if people are trying to learn information, give them a chance to teach it. I actually was a part of a study group that did this. Instead of reading the book together, everyone would teach a section. I'm looking at one of the members of that study group right now. But some of you might hear this and think, I do not want to do that. And that's fine, because we all have different minds. Now let's talk about worship for a while. Because just like how there are different types of components that contribute to learning, there are also different types of components that contribute to creating a sense of worship for people, that help them set aside their day, the traffic, their to-do list. And these components help to move them over the threshold and into worship. This list of worship components comes from the worship designer Marcia McPhee. She's the author of the book, Think Like a Filmmaker, and she also offers training sessions, which I've taken part in. And remember, everyone has their own preferences for which components are most meaningful to them. She says that within worship services, where you're creating a space that will help people get into the mood to worship, people might use linguistic components, music components, visual or ritual and personal involvement. Take a look at this list. Think about which components are most meaningful to you and which ones not so much. For those components that aren't so meaningful to you, ask yourself if you know someone for whom those components are meaningful. Linguistic in the worship list refers to anything that is spoken, a speech or a prayer. It could also be words on a screen. So I think you can see how that relates to the reading and writing learning component. I want to draw some parallels between these two lists, in part because it helps me to remember what these lists are. If I can't remember one component in one list, I might remember its corresponding component in the other list. So let's keep going down this list here. Music. I don't need to describe to you what music is, but why might I be pairing it with auditory learning? Doesn't auditory learning just have to do with words? Yes, but there's also a tonality and a rhythm to it, and when that's used well, I think that auditory learning is almost a little bit musical, or listening to someone speak can be musical. So that's how I relate auditory learning to the music component in worship. Let's go to visual. This includes things like decor, images on a screen. There we are. It might even include what people are wearing, anything that people can see that is intended to contribute to a worshipful mood. This is for people who process content visually. Ritual and personal involvement in worship. I had no use for ritual until I found out that it was my mom's favorite learning component. And I realized that maybe I got to give it more credit. So people who like the ritual component will find it meaningful to either do a ritual themselves or watch someone else do a ritual. They like to see things happen. And again, I think you can make that connection to kinesthetic learning yourself. And as I began to think more about ritual and even start incorporating it into the things that I was doing, it really did start to have more meaning for me. And I feel like now I have a more rounded worship experience when I include all of these rather than only my preferred components. So why is this important? Why am I up here talking about study groups and different learning components that we bring into study groups? And now all of a sudden, I'm talking about worship. It's because our study groups will be better off if we take a holistic and varied approach to their structure. Do you remember that quote from the beginning? The purpose of education should be, oh, I'm too far. There we are. Nope. There. The purpose of education should be acquirement of skill, pursuit of wisdom, realization of selfhood, and attainment of spiritual values. Worship is a part of that progression too, and you guys know that. And so many study groups have incorporated worship into their routine. But again, I think that there are some generalizations that can be made about how we do worship. A moment of silence, a spoken prayer, maybe 10 minutes of meditation. That's what I typically see. But the Urantia book refers to worship on paradise as refreshing play. Is there room for variety in that refreshing play? I like it when worship has a guitar and some drums, when worship is like a party. I like it when there's variation. My favorite word in the Urantia book is jubilee. It's used not in reference to worship, but to specific celebrations. And this word seems to push back against the idea that in order to be spiritual, we must be calm and contemplative. And instead, it reminds us of the need for balance in our lives, in which, depending on our preferences, we make room for things like prayerful meditation and creative, jubilant expression. The Urantia book states, the old cults were too egocentric, the new must be the outgrowth of applied love. The new cult must, like the old, foster sentiment, satisfy emotion, and promote loyalty, but it must do more. It must facilitate spiritual progress, enhance cosmic meanings, augment moral values, encourage social development, and stimulate a high type of personal religious living. None of that is about format. There is no format dictated to us for how we will reach people. We can be creative and find a format that helps people, with all their different minds, do all this. I really do like to party. Dance party in the kitchen, anyone? In that dream of the Bogat Standard, where you've got a bunch of different study groups. Tim, can you hit the space bar? Thank you. In that dream of the Bogat Standard, where you've got a bunch of different study groups in a city, and there's room for some variety, wouldn't it be neat if one of those study groups was really gung-ho about study? Another included study but specialized in worship, and another was more social than anything else. These are places where people could wet their whistle in a format that was attractive to them. There are so many ways that study groups or Urantia groups could happen if we just think creatively about them. You guys know I'm the program coordinator for the teacher education program, and it's hard for me to talk about anything without talking about that. This program has taken a holistic approach to education in which students engage with a variety of learning components in order to reinforce Urantia book content. They write, they talk, they listen. There are options to create and use visuals. They practice articulating Urantia book concepts and values so that they can be confident when they go out into the world. And they spend a lot of time on this. They don't get to just set the book aside or set the program aside for a week and show up to class on Friday. It is an immersive experience. But there's time dedicated to worship as well. Prompts for individual worship during the week, opening and closing prayers during class, and opportunities for student-led worship. The holistic approach of this immersive experience has led to comments like this. I am a different person because of this. There was a transformative quality to the year. The people who go through the teacher education program all have their own hopes and dreams for how they will function as teachers. Our graduates all have their own projects that they are embarking on. But it is my hope that one of the things that grows out of this program is innovative study groups, where they use some of the variety that they were exposed to. But Alice, you say, I don't want an innovative study group. I like my study group. Yeah, that's the kicker, ain't it? What do we do when, on the one hand, we like what we're doing, but on the other hand, we want to serve the kinds of people who never came back? And we don't yet have enough readers for a bunch of varied study groups in any given city. We're a long way from the Bogat Standard. If Kansas City was meeting it, there would be 5 study groups here. I think maybe there is 1. Anyone from Kansas City want to correct me? 1. And that's pretty normal. I like the idea of being able to offer a great variety of formats for people to choose from. But the issue that we have right now is that we don't have enough people to support a bunch of different formats, and our study groups are self-selected toward those who like the read and discuss model. If you're out in the audience and you're thinking, Alice, I do not want to draw pictures in study group, I get that. But is there anything that we can do to address this, to widen our appeal? Sure there is. The most obvious being, try out some new components with your study group, and maybe they'll like it. Or not. Maybe let people in your group take turns choosing different types of activities that they feel drawn to. Or if your study group is large enough, some of you can seed a new study group on the other side of town with a different format. There are so many different kinds of people out there in the world, and we can provide them with an improved experience when we find learning components and worship components that they find meaningful. We may just need to think creatively about how to do it. Thank you.
See, I told you it'd be good. Okay, so thank you, Alice, for getting us back on schedule. Awesome. The morning workshops start at 10:30. You're now on the third of your 4 blocks. I think everyone's figured out by now where you should go. So that's at 10:30. Lunch will be served at 12:30. I know we had a little bit of issue where you exhausted the food yesterday. They promised to bring more today, but please be respectful of others before you go back for a second helping, just in case. And then we're all back here at 2 o'clock for our next plenary talk. There is going to be an event taking place in here over the lunch hour. So if you do come a little bit early for 2 o'clock and the doors closed, please hang out a little bit and let that finish if you don't mind. So I will see you all either in workshops or back here or at lunch or back here at 2 o'clock. Thank you.